If you're dealing with thyroid problems or gallbladder problems or maybe gallstone or even common bile duct stone type issues, it's important to understand the possible connections between these two troubles. Not only so you can understand, well, if this is happening, I should know what might be coming pretty soon, but when you want to take steps to improve these issues naturally, it can be important to understand the connections to help you figure out what steps are going to help you the most. Let's jump in.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
Now remember, I'm not a doctor, I'm not giving anybody medical advice here, but if you're dealing with both of these issues, thyroid issues and gallbladder issues, I'm going to share some studies that help you understand how these things can be connected. And if you're dealing with thyroid problems or gallbladder problems, it's important to understand that how one issue can create trouble for the other one so you can take steps to improve your situation before other trouble starts to show up. So the first thing to understand when we're looking at like gallstones or common bile duct stones and thyroid issues is that when we look at these gallstones that can show up in the gallbladder, and sometimes they're in the gallbladder, but they can also block bile ducts in that pathway that goes from the gallbladder down to the intestinal tract or from the liver down to the gallbladder. There's bile ducts where things flow through, and some stones can get in there and block some pathways and create a lot of trouble that way, just like gallstones can create trouble inside the gallbladder. But when we look at these stones, a lot of times they want to blame cholesterol because when they have all these stones in the gallbladder and they yank it out and throw it in the trash and then they dissect these stones like, oh man, look at all the cholesterol. These stones are made up of a lot of cholesterol. You should go on a low cholesterol and a low fat diet because you have too much cholesterol. But what we need to understand when we're looking at this is sometimes it's more about concentration. Let's look at this study, and I'm going to put the links to these studies in the description below this video if you want to dig deeper into this. But when we look at this study, the underlying mechanisms, how hypothyroidism affects the formation of common bile duct stones, a review, they were basically looking at not only gallstones but also those common bile duct stones that we were kind of talking about. And when they're looking at the comparisons between who had these stones and how many of those people in the study also had hypothyroid type issues, they went on to say that this finding suggested that factors other than merely those affecting cholesterol metabolism, for example, specific effects on bile flow, might be behind the association between CBD stones and hypothyroidism. So they're saying that it might just not be about this cholesterol metabolism issue that's allowing all this cholesterol to accumulate. It might have to do with some bile flow issues. So to understand that, we'll look at this digestive process just a little bit. I talk about this process in a lot of my videos. You might be sick of hearing about it, but this is going to be important for this conversation because bile is this soapy substance that's made by the liver and then it's sent down this common bile duct down here to be stored in the gallbladder. So the gallbladder's job is just to store that bile, but also to concentrate that bile so that it can be more effective when it's called on to help us emulsify our dietary fats so that we can access fat-soluble vitamins like A, E, D, and K. It helps us process, fatty acids. It helps us process cholesterol. So there's a lot of important things. And this bile is actually made up of cholesterol. There's cholesterol in that bile, and there's a lot of bile salts and bilirubin and other stuff in there. But this bile contains cholesterol in it. And then the bile also helps us process and metabolize cholesterol so the body can use that correctly. So what's important to think about is that there's a variety of issues in our life or in our body that can thicken up this bile so that it doesn't really flow correctly. It's not going to flow down and help us digest our foods and emulsify our dietary fats and do all the things that bile is supposed to do if it's not flowing correctly. And if it's not flowing correctly, remember that this job of the gallbladder is to concentrate that bile. So there's not like an off switch to the concentration trick that it does. If it's not flowing out of the gallbladder, it will continue to concentrate until it concentrates into sludge or even stones. So remember, if you're going to concentrate like a gravy or something on the stove, you're just going to kind of cook it down and it's going to remove that moisture and it becomes more and more thick and concentrated. So when it becomes more concentrated, a lot of that moisture is removed. What's left over is the cholesterol and some of these other things that can form into stones. So now the cholesterol gets yelled at. Wow, look at these stones you made, stupid cholesterol. But it wasn't the cholesterol's fault. It was just still there once that moisture and everything was concentrated out of that bile substance. So that's an important factor when we're looking at what's creating gallstones to form, what's restricting bile to flow, and the connections to the thyroid. So when we go back to this study here, we see that they say when they're talking about how hypothyroidism may affect the formation of CBD stones, they say that in hypothyroidism, the lack of thyroxine or thyroid hormone decreases liver cholesterol metabolism, resulting in bile cholesterol supersaturation, which in turn impairs motility, contractility, and filling of the gallbladder, contributing to the retention of cholesterol crystals and to the nucleation and growth of gallstones. It also diminishes bile secretion and also resulting in impaired clearance of precipitates from the bile ducts. It also reduces the sphincter of Oddi relaxation, resulting in delayed bile flow and thus formation and accumulation of CBD stones. So they're saying here that the thyroid hormone is very important to help us metabolize that cholesterol correctly, or there might be too much accumulation of that cholesterol in the bile. Shut up, phone, we're talking about thyroid and gallbladder things. So when these things start to accumulate, that can cause trouble where there could be more things to thicken up if it's not flowing correctly, and if it's getting concentrated more, that can be part of the problem as well. So when we look at this lack of thyroid hormone that seems to be creating this trouble with the cholesterol metabolization, we also need to understand that in order for the thyroid to function correctly, it's not about just bringing in this T4 that is the thyroid hormone. That's the inactive form. That T4 has to be converted to T3 so that the thyroid can function correctly. And the problem is that most of that conversion from T4 to T3 takes place in the liver and in the kidneys, but predominantly the liver is a big responsible factor for converting that to this T3 so that the thyroid can function correctly, so that there's enough of that active thyroid so that all of these bodily functions can work correctly. So the problem is that the liver has a lot of other jobs as well. And one of those jobs is to filter junk and toxins out of the body. That's a big responsibility for the liver. Everybody knows that. The liver filters toxins out of the body. What a lot of people don't know is that it'll take a lot of those toxins and put it into the bile. So that when the bile is coming down here and moving through the intestinal tract to help us digest our food correctly, help us access fat-soluble vitamins, help neutralize the acids that leave the stomach, it has a lot of functions that this bile does. And as it's moving through the intestinal tract, it's carrying those toxins with it, so those toxins can go out the back door when we poop like a champion. But if this bile is not flowing correctly, which is very common today, if it's not flowing, then those toxins aren't going out the back door. They're not being removed. The trash is not being taken out. So now these toxins accumulate, and the liver's like, oh man, I'm filtering this stuff out again. Why are you giving me this again? I just filtered this out. So now the liver's doing the same job over and over again. It becomes overwhelmed, and it can't do all of the other jobs it's supposed to do, like converting the T4 to T3. So now we have a lower level of the active hormone that is required for that thyroid to function correctly, and now we have the issue of the thyroid not working correctly. Well, was it the fault of the bile not flowing correctly, or was the bile not flowing correctly because it became too saturated with too much cholesterol because the thyroid hormone wasn't there to help us metabolize this cholesterol? I don't know. But in either case, they're going to say, oh man, you got to go on a low cholesterol, low fat diet. I mean, look at this. Every time you eat fat, you're having this gallbladder pain right here. Well, it's telling you to stop eating fat. Well, here's the problem with that. When we start to do that, we're reducing how often this gallbladder is even being called on. So this gallbladder is triggered by something called cholecystokinin here in the duodenum. The duodenum is like the first 10, 12 inches of the small intestine. And that cholecystokinin tells the gallbladder, hey, it's time to squirt bile down here. Come on, bring it on down. The thing that a lot of people don't know is that cholecystokinin is triggered by either fat in the diet or stomach acid or amino acids. And the problem is it's very common for people today to still be running in horror from fat, like we're in the 80s and we're wearing parachute pants with a mullet. We don't do that anymore, but a lot of people still run from fat when they told us that fat was bad for us. We know that this is false now. It's just not true. It's been proven over and over again, but a lot of people don't know because it can take 20, 30, 40 years for new information to catch up to the mainstream. So they're running in horror from fat, so there's not enough fat coming down to trigger this gallbladder to actually go into action. So if somebody's having gallbladder discomfort, they're like, oh, go on a low-fat diet so you don't have that discomfort. Now they're going to call on this gallbladder even less. The bile is going to stay in there and concentrate even more and concentrate into more sludge or more stones. So that's a really big problem. Like your body needs that cholesterol to make hormones work correctly. And those hormones need to be working correctly in order for the thyroid to work correctly. So avoiding cholesterol in your diet can be a really big mistake. It's also very common to see both of these issues with vegetarian or vegan type diets where someone's not bringing in enough animal protein and enough animal fats. It's the animal fats that are very good at triggering that gallbladder into action. And the other problem is that the thyroid requires a lot of hormones to be working correctly. And we need fats to be able to produce that cholesterol and a lot of our hormones. So if someone's on a low-fat diet or some type of vegan diet that's not bringing in enough, then that can create trouble. And I'll put some links to a study below. You can check that out if you want to dig into that a little bit more. And another thing to think about is hypochlorhydria, or a lack of stomach acid. And here in this paper here on achlorhydria, which is a lack of stomach acid, they say here that under hypothyroidism, thyroid hormone plays a role in hydrochloric acid secretion. Hence, hypothyroidism can lead to a lack of stomach acid. And remember that it's this stomach acid, once our food is acidified in the stomach correctly using hydrochloric acid or stomach acid, that is the process that helps us really start to break down our food. That's why it's there. It's there on purpose. Mother Nature is not an idiot. So we make stomach acid to help acidify that food, and once it's acidified correctly, it will come down here into the duodenum, and that's what's going to trigger the gallbladder to squirt the bile down to help neutralize those acids and digest those foods correctly. So remember, the things that trigger this cholecystokinin to tell the gallbladder to bring it on down are the fats. Dietary fats will do that, amino acids, or stomach acid. The thing with the amino acids comes from breaking down protein correctly, and you need stomach acid to break down protein correctly. So it's very common for someone not to be making enough stomach acid. Millions of people turn off their stomach acid on purpose every day. But even if someone's not using some type of acid reflux medication, there's a lot of reasons that someone would not be making enough stomach acid. But we see that this could be part of the problem. So we see that with hypothyroidism, that can cause trouble to where the body cannot produce that hydrochloric acid when there's not enough thyroid hormone allowing everything to function the way that it's supposed to function. And then without the stomach acid, that can restrict this bile from flowing, and then we see how that lack of bile flow can contribute to these thyroid issues as well. So we have this big circle thing with where did it start? I don't know. Does anybody ever really know? The thing is, you really want to fix everything that's going wrong to allow the body to function like it's supposed to function. And a lot of hypothyroid issues are actually going to be a Hashimoto's issue, which is considered an autoimmune issue where they'll tell you that, oh man, the body's attacking the thyroid and so the thyroid can't work correctly and produce those hormones, so it's like having an underactive thyroid. And another thing to really consider, and I have some links in the description below, some studies that help us understand that the viewpoint for a lot of people about this Hashimoto's is that it's really kind of a food sensitivity problem where the body is reacting to specific foods as if those foods are an invader, and then it attacks those foods, and it also attacking those types of proteins can confuse the body into attacking the thyroid as well. And when we're looking at food sensitivity issues, a lot of times it has to do with an inability to break that food down correctly. So food has to be broken down into elemental nutrients for your body to be able to use it. Your body can't use a peanut butter sandwich. It doesn't know what to do with a peanut butter sandwich. It has to break that down into vitamins and minerals and amino acids and fats, and then the body can utilize that. So if either that stomach acid side is not working correctly, or the bile is not flowing correctly, now you can't break that food down correctly. You can't break it down the way that it's supposed to be broken down so the body can access those nutrients. So now that food still has an identity. It's like, hey, I'm a peanut butter sandwich. So it goes in, and if there are intestinal permeability issues, also known as leaky gut, that have been problematic and usually come about because invaders come in and microorganisms come in, usually because the stomach acid is not there to fry them as they come in. And they come in and they make that intestinal lining more permeable. They kind of bore holes through that, so then this food that didn't get broken down correctly gets into the bloodstream, and then the body attacks it like it's some kind of bad guy. So I'll put a link in the description below for our video on steps to improve leaky gut if you think that might be a problem for you. But that can be a big deal when it comes to this Hashimoto's type of hypothyroidism. And they talk a lot about how avoiding gluten and grains is very important to improve Hashimoto's. And when you look at some of the studies, like some of them like, yeah, this really helped a lot, and some of them are like, it's not really working. But that's because there can be other issues beyond just gluten. A lot of times in these studies, like, oh, we're going to give this person gluten. Here's a gluten capsule, and then we're going to watch what happens. But a lot of times it's about some of these other cofactors in these foods that contain gluten that are really creating the trouble. So sometimes it's about the gluten-containing foods and not just the gluten itself. But that can be important to take care of if you're having a Hashimoto's type issue. And another thing is estrogen dominance also seems to play a role with both the lack of bile flow and the hypothyroid type issues. And an interesting thing that we see a lot is that when estrogen goes too high, which it can go high for a variety of reasons. Maybe somebody's using birth control that raises estrogen. Maybe they're using some type of estrogen therapy that's very popular right now. Or maybe the body is just elevating estrogen for other reasons. There's maybe a lot of stress going on that's causing some of these hormones to go a little bit too high. But when that happens, we see the bile thicken up and have problems flowing correctly. So that may be why we're seeing this association with the estrogen dominance. So what are the steps? What do we do? Well, I don't know. It kind of depends on what's going wrong and what needs the most help. Now, when we have clients that come with us with hypothyroid issues, if it's not a Hashimoto's, we're really going to do what we can to get that bile thinned out and get it flowing correctly. And we take that as an initial step because that's one of the more easier things to do for most people. Some people it might be a little more troubling if it's really been thickened up and backed up for a long time, but for most people they can take steps to improve that bile flow. If there's signs of stomach acid not working correctly, then that has to be corrected. And a person can synthesize that acidic stomach digestion function and help the body break it down correctly, and then all of a sudden we have that stomach acid coming down the duodenum and triggering the gallbladder to drop the bile down. So those are important things to fix. If bile isn't flowing correctly, we also want to fix that so that the liver is not overwhelmed, so that it can do all of its jobs, like converting this T4 to T3. If we're on a low-fat, cholesterol, or vegan diet, just don't do that. Just don't do that. I know you thought it was the healthiest thing to do. It turns out that that wasn't accurate. Now, if you're vegan or vegetarian for religious or spiritual reasons, then that's a different issue. Then maybe you need to continue doing that, and you need to find some methods to get more of these fats and needed nutrients into the body. But if you're doing it because you think it's the healthiest thing, just say, oops, I did it wrong, and make some corrections there. And if this is the issue and you can remove gluten and grains and then take steps to improve any leaky gut issue, then that could be really helpful in that scenario as well. So you can see the steps are going to be different from person to person, but I hope this helps you understand the connection and how one thing going wrong can create trouble for the other thing as well. But right now, if you want to dig deeper into these and try to find some solutions for yourself, you can jump over and check out our video on either 5 steps to improve bile flow that'll walk you through steps to get that bile moving, or you can check out our video on full digestive reset if you think you might have some low stomach acid issues as well. I hope those help you find some answers.